Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast, and welcome back as we continue our three-part webinar series on driving a culture of performance, measure, manage, and hire for culture. My name is Charles Summers. It is my pleasure to be serving as your moderator today. We're going to make today's webinar as interactive as possible. So we've gone ahead and added in a few fun polls to the discussion today, and we'll also review the audience culture using the Humantelligence platform for those of you who have gone through and taken the free assessment, the free culture assessment. If you have any questions at any time during today's presentation, please use the GoToWebinar questions queue. When it makes sense, we'll jump into the questions as we go and also have a 15-minute Q&A at the end. If you'd like to reach out to me about any Humantelligence webinar questions or future webinar topics, feel free to reach out to me directly at charles.summers@humantelligence.com. Thanks again for registering for this three-part webinar series on driving a culture of performance. The first step in that process is to measure your underlying culture. So in part one last month, we dove into the methods to consider when measuring your culture. You can find that recording on our YouTube page, but you'll also receive a copy after today's webinar and a follow-up email that comes from me. Today, in part two, we'll go into how to use that underlying culture data to better manage and calibrate a performance culture. Then on Wednesday, March 18th, we'll show you how to use this data to hire for your unique cultures at every level of your organization. So I want to make sure that you get the most out of your experience with us. So I've put together a handful of items for your success. So the first item here is the free culture self-assessment. So you'll see this today when we do our review of the audience culture. But there's over about 230 people who have gone through and taken that free culture assessment. So we'll do a little culture mapping this afternoon. But if you haven't already, go through and take that free assessment. It'll be a really good experience. You'll definitely glean some insights about yourself. Also, we can take that to the team level and do a team culture mapping, which again, you'll see a little bit of that today. So you can invite your team, and up to 20 people, we can do a free team culture mapping for you as well using the Humantelligence platform. Number three, so ask a lot of questions. As I mentioned before, you can use the GoToWebinar questions queue at any time to ask any questions. And we'll handle those kind of as we go or during the Q&A at the end. After today's webinar, I'll send out an email that has a number of different materials. So you'll get the webinar recording from parts 1 and 2. You'll get the webinar slides from both of those webinars as well. The free assessment link, along with a white paper and infographic. So just to kind of set the stage here and give you a little bit of background on what Humantelligence does, if you don't already know. The Humantelligence platform uses a 3-step process to build high-performing cultures. And the steps are measure, manage, and hire, just like our webinar series suggests. So we first measure the underlying behaviors, motivators, and ideal work environment of the individual, team, and organization level. Then we take that data and look at high and low performing individuals and teams and calibrate a target performance culture, much of what we're going to be talking about today. And then finally, in step 3, which we'll go over in more depth in part 3, that when that data is applied to the recruiting side, it's become more intentional in hiring for culture fit or diversity of thought. So it really depends on what you're looking to do and your needs. So without really further ado here, I'd like to introduce you to our CEO here at Humantelligence, Juan Betancourt. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and kick things over to Juan. So Juan, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Can they see my screen? I'd like to share my face as well. Can they see me, Charles?
Yes, they can now.
Okay, great. Nice to meet everybody. For the new attendees on today's webinar, part 2 of 3. I know that many of you in part 1 were able to see my daughter, Aura, because we had a nanny cancel. Aura regrets to inform you all through me that she can't join today. So, but she does wish you all the best. Anyways, in terms of today's webinar, we're going to recap what we went over in part one in about 3 or 4 slides, 5 minutes for those who were not part of it. It'll help bring you up to speed. 2, we're going to break down managing culture, what you can do with the data, not just at the team level, but also at a group level. And we're going to use your assessment results, right? You all took individual self-assessment, about 230 of you. We're going to roll the data up, and it's instant. Once we have the data, we'll show you what all of your culture is, all the people who are in HR, on this webinar, 230 of you, what your culture is, and we're going to break it out, compare US registrants versus non-US. We're going to compare male HR people in this webinar versus female and see, are there any differences? And you'll start to get an idea of how you can play with data and analytics applied to your people and their psychometrics to get insights. And sometimes there are no insights, and sometimes there are, and so, but you don't know unless you try. Then we're going to look at how you can use data to look at your high performers versus your low performers, and what you can do with that insight to develop the low performers so they can be high performers, but also so that you can then hire in the future with that benchmark profile, and how to create an ideal profile around the psychometrics of a person, so that when you get 500 resumes applying for a role in sales or accounting or marketing, and you get down to the 50 best resumes, you don't start to use subjective things such as phone screens. You can actually then map applicants by taking the same assessment to who is most like either your high performers, if you want to clone, or conversely, who would add the most diversity of thought to that team if problem solving and diversity of thought and creativity is ideal for that team. Next, we'll go into how you can use this to develop employees, promote and find competency models that are not just one competency model for the whole company, because obviously the competency model for your millennials should look millennial leadership should look very different than the competency model for leaders who've been there for 50 years. And you might have different ones for different demographics in your company by region, where there might be more Hispanics or African Americans or Asian Americans or Anglos, as well as by demographics in terms of socioeconomic competency models of leadership. And then we're going to infuse and show you how you can use these insights not as a one-off workshop with an industrial psychologist, the way that assessments have been run for the last 50 years. That's so 1980s, right? With technology and everything on the cloud, you can now leverage these insights around behaviors, motivators, and work styles. You'll see the BMW concept or framework throughout this call. You'll be able to pull these tips on how to motivate, influence, communicate 24/7 in any language, at any moment in your workflows for all your employees, so that instantly everyone becomes emotionally intelligent throughout your organization, and everybody can collaborate, connect, and work better together. So Charles, I'm trying to figure out where I click to go to the next slide. I'm not seeing the, are you clicking or me?
I just clicked that, but there's little arrows in the bottom left-hand corner.
Let me see. I'm clicking on those arrows and nothing's happening. Could you test out if, like, give me permission or something?
Yep, I'll look at that if you want to get started on this one.
Okay, great. So here's a recap of the polls we did in part one. We talked about top left. I'll just go down each column. What's your biggest challenge? A lot of people talk about engagement of their employees and sourcing and the hiring and turnover, and just generally performance. Surprisingly, HR technology was only 12% of you. Does your company have a process to assess whether employees are aligned with company values? 70% said yes. In terms of, does your company have a process to assess if employees are aligned with company's culture? About half of you said no. Is it clear to you why engagement surveys are not measuring culture? 116 of you said yes. Because we went through in the part one how engagement surveys aren't your culture, it's something else. And how most of you realize that about 77 out of the 100 that responded realize that engagement surveys aren't really doing anything to improve performance or ROI. So the big takeaway is employee engagements, although a priority, you should have them, you're not going to get results on performance through doing them and impacting truly having a culture of intention and hiring for culture fit. Most people have never used the insights from an engagement survey in the hiring process. Go figure, because when you hire, most of you have told us and your executives that you're hiring for a culture of intention and a culture of values, right? Well, why aren't your engagement survey results aligned to that? It's because it's actually measuring something else. Yeah, Charles, it's not moving forward for me, so you're going to have to do it.
It'll probably start working now, just because I just gave you access. So.
Okay.
All right, I'll go ahead and launch this poll. So this will be our first poll of today's webinar. We'll give everybody about 30 seconds to get their answers in. About 15 more seconds. All right, we'll give it 5 more seconds. There's still a few coming in here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. All right, so you should be able to see the results on your screen now. Juan, if you want to go through them.
Yeah, so it seems that 51% of you kind of measure culture through these engagement surveys, which in part one, we kind of showed that that's actually not your culture, but that's what people are currently using to try to gauge culture. Turnover rates, 25% of you, Glassdoor type third-party rating, 6% of you. Glad to see that you're not relying on those Glassdoor results, and 18% something else. Thank you, Charles. Let me see if I can now move to the next slide.
I'm going to bring my mouse back over here so that you can do it.
Okay, great, it's working. So we did a survey, or we sponsored HR.com to do one of the largest surveys of over 500 HR executives around culture and measuring it and how tricky it is. Here are the results summarized, which many of you can get this 45-page report or white paper from that HR.com did. We did not do the survey, they did, from Charles. So just write a note to Charles, let him know if you want that thought leadership piece. Really great insights from many of your peers. But the key takeaway from that survey from your peers in HR in North America was, measuring culture can really be tricky, right? Just 26% of you believe that measuring overall corporate culture is possible today, and that fewer than 23% of you believe that measuring the culture of the specific teams and departments within the organization was possible, and even fewer, only 16%, felt that measuring the difference between actual the corporate culture and specific team cultures was possible, and that's a problem. And so when organizations do measure culture, most of you felt that you relied on these kind of climate surveys. Well, today's survey showed 51%, and then the other survey at HR.com showed that 43% rely on metrics such as turnover, where you guys were at 25%. Also from that survey, the key takeaway from this slide is that companies that actually measure the psychometrics, the behaviors, motivators, and work styles, 1, 2, or a combination of the 3, are 3 times more likely to be, actually, let me take that back. The higher performing companies, so companies that are high performing, are 3 times more likely to measure such things as behaviors, motivators, and work styles. So if you want to look at your peer industry group, whatever industry you're in, the companies that are performing the best are the ones that are actually involving psychometrics and analytics to analyze them. It's not moving forward. Oh, maybe. Now it is. Got it. Okay, so measuring these three areas of the psychology or culture of your employees and how they behave and work and put that into the environment, it's simple and it's scalable and it does lead to results today with technology. You can now understand your underlying culture, measure these different three things of not only individuals, but roll the data up with data analytics and technology to see what makes up your organization and how your organization operates. Hence the overall culture, team by team, group by group, function by function, geography by geography. Clearly, the culture of a Starbucks in Miami and Hialeah, where it's all Latin employees and Latin customers, is a very different culture on how to behave and what motivates people and their work styles than in New York City, than in Lagos, Nigeria, Hong Kong, or Sao Paulo, Brazil, or Lille, France. While culture is considered important by most, leadership still hasn't bought in. Now, this is a challenge that I cannot help you with. You all are going to be faced with the need to try to convince your superiors, your peers at the corporate level to invest in it. So here are the results from the HR.com study just last fall. So although 55%, actually 77 if you add the two, percent of the people surveyed, and these are mostly executives in HR, feel that culture is really important, okay, very or important. Only 1 in 5 have a dedicated corporate budget. If you look at the columns, those rows, you add up the 947 on the far right, basically that's about 20% have a budget of over $100,000 to $1 million or more. But 80%, 1/5 of companies today don't really have a budget. So here's the most important thing for a company with no budget. That is a huge gap of opportunity. But as we all know, the greatest opportunities in life are also the greatest challenges. And so the challenge is for you to leverage information, data, and insights like the ones we're presenting and in different conferences you go to your management team to let them know how important culture is, and now that there's tools and HR technology that can help address it, measure it, manage it, and help you hire for it. So let's now finish the recap of part one. So most organizations are relying on measurement techniques for culture that actually don't measure culture. KPIs such as turnover, engagement surveys, Glassdoor. Organizations that do have high-performing culture do measure these kind of personality traits around behaviors, motives, and work styles of their employee base. So if you want to compete with your competitors and be high-performing, this is one area that is correlated with that higher performance. Using an instrument to measure the BMW is now simple, scalable, and does lead to results, and we'll show you those results in some case studies later today. And although most of you believe that culture is really important, there's not much of a budget and approval yet from senior management. So step 2, managing it. Now you've collected the data and measured it. Here are some steps you can use the data around behaviors, motivators, and work styles to manage your culture. Okay, so you can first break down the collected data at a team level, and every team has a unique culture. And so you can now see the insights to make a team leader a better leader. You can have better performance among that team, and the team leader can now see the strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots of that team and how that team can work better together with other teams cross-functionally. 2, you can look at top-performing and low-performing individuals and teams and compare the high-performing Starbucks stores with the low-performing ones and see what is the right composition of a team at Starbucks of baristas. Is it all being exactly the same, cloning your baristas, or is it really a multitude and diversity of type of people at a Starbucks? And so getting those insights. Is it a call center where you want to clone all the people, or is it an engineering or R&D team or manufacturing team that works in a batch process that wants diversity of people on that team? You can then third, create a target culture. If your strategy or product technology or services, okay, are taking a left for 2020, Well, guess what? That roadmap, that change probably needs a new culture to support it. So now you can align the strategy with the culture for every team, every division, every group in your company. 4, you can use the culture to better develop employees, not only future high potentials, but also the ones that are not performing, instead of firing them, saving you millions of dollars for large companies on this call, instead of just getting rid of them. 5, you can infuse this information into everyday workflows, so emails, calendar invites, where you can get insights on how everyone can collaborate and work better together simply by clicking on a person's name in an email or in a calendar invite to see the culture of the group you're about to present to, that's about to prove something or about to write to someone in your company that maybe you don't know. And 6, you can then track your culture in real time, where you want to go intentionally, where you are today, and how to get there. So we're going to now go to a culture mapping of the group, what we measured for all of you. So here is, for example, our platform. Here is the data for all 230 of you today.
Give me just a second here. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
So here's the culture mapping of the 231 of you. Okay, so here are the behaviors. So it seems like, the majority of you are steady, 49% of you are dominant, steady, and 44% of you dominant, deliberate. Now this makes sense for an HR group, right? Steady and deliberate. It's not like you guys are the R&D innovation team. You guys need to make sure that the wheels stay on and people stay in their tracks. So this makes sense for overall group. Now you can also see this information as a bar chart if it's easier to interpret. Right, so here's, it also is more clear that, most HR executives, at least the 230 on this call, are more stable oriented, okay? Some are reflective, some are outgoing. So some of you guys are really social. Some of you, and another half are a little more observing. Some of you are cautious, interesting. Almost half of you are also creative. That's an interesting insight there. If you want to see the distribution, because it doesn't mean that there were no decisive people, right? The distribution shows you, for example, that there are 18, 17, all the way over to the left, a very intense energetic vibration around being more deliberate than decisive. But there are people here in the call that took it that are decisive. So we've added this really cool feature where you can see the distribution if that's important to you. So you can now see the motivators. The motivators, a little more diverse what motivates the group of 230 of you. Most of you, 35%, are dominant, motivated by helping, a drive to help others. HR has always been a support function to enable the rest of the company, so this makes sense. Freedom, I'm sorry, it's hard to read, it's so small. Following a personal sense of direction. This is a surprise for me that, a third of you are basically dominant, following a personal sense of direction. That's great to see. And that could change the perception of some of your peer function groups that think that you guys are not freedom and independent thinkers. So that's wonderful to see. And then you have a lot less things such as supporting and being unique. In terms of ideal work styles, we have here new solutions and working with facts and variety being the 3 most. I think that's pretty clear what that means. It's obviously new solutions. A lot of HR execs aren't, but because you guys are on this webinar, you guys are looking at technology for the future. Clearly, you guys have self-selected in there. Most HR does work with facts, not opinions. And you guys in this call are looking to do things differently. Interestingly, our 4th lens, which is not science, this is just a survey, unlike the first 3, BMW, which is science. This survey shows that for most of you, personal development, achievement, and integrity, are the most dominant things that are important to you today in your life priorities. Now you can also get a culture report. I won't go into that now. The culture report is a 20-page report that'll show you what are the strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots of this group, how they can work together with other groups. And I'm going to compare groups now to show you how you can now dive deeper into the analytics. So of the 230 of you, there were some of you that were in the US. Charles, do we know how many were US versus non-US?
It'll show on the next screen as soon as you hit run
Okay.
comparison.
And you can compare it. Is there a difference between HR executives on this webinar today in these groups in the US versus non-US? So in the US, we have 153, and in non-US, we have 78. And I apologize to bundle all non-US together. That sounds very American. All non-US are not the same, but just for expediency of time, we want to just see if there's a difference here. Now, interestingly, there's not much of a difference. The only real difference is that non-US HR executives, in their behaviors, they're a little bit more reflective, okay? They listen a little bit carefully before responding and draw a logical conclusion. They control their emotions and remain calm under pressure, which for those who might agree, you know, Europeans and South Americans and Asians and Africans, you know, maybe don't jump to conclusions as quickly as Americans. We're more individualistic. It's an interpretation here on that piece. Whereas Americans, the one thing that jumps out a little stronger in terms of their behaviors, is a little more freeform as dominant traits. They find new ways of doing things. They ask questions that may challenge the status quo. So they're not going to just accept things. In terms of motivators, here we have a lot of the same motivations. So really no difference on what motivates people who do HR in the US among these 153 today and not in the US among these 78. In terms of ideal work styles, again, not much difference in the way HR executives are working. So let's go back now and do another comparison, the last one, which is going to be, we're going to do the entire group again, and we're going to look at males or females versus males. I don't even know how many males we have in the call today. Let's see. So there's 67 males and 137 females. So about, what is that, a third male? And so the differences here, no differences in the behaviors of the males and females really. In terms of the work motivators, there's one huge difference. The females, the 137 females, have a dominant trait of being unique. So 14% of you are dominantly unique, which means you like to challenge conventional thinking and appreciates unique perspectives. You're not afraid to take calculated risks. This might be a surprise to you. Often males have been perceived, correctly or incorrectly, as being more the kind of unique, aggressive thinkers. But in this case, on this call, a great insight here is that no, the women actually are more in terms of challenging the status quo. The men, however, have one trait here that the women don't seem to have as much on this call. They're more knowledge, driven by knowledge. There's a group of you who value learning and are driven to seek solutions and get comfortable with reading and studying independently. And then the last lens we have here in terms of differences between female on the left and male on the right is not very much. Here it's basically a wash, very similar in how you work, okay, and what energy, what environments give you energy. It's basically environments with new solutions, working with facts and variety with some structure, right? HR is known to have and put in structure. And in terms of life priorities, interestingly here, the big difference is the women seem to want more security, 21%, but that is a top 5, as well as affection, 23%, whereas the men, the difference is really creativity as a life priority and freedom as their other. Okay, Charles, we can go now back to the webinar slides. So as you can see, this drill down in culture, you know, and by the way, I'm at a conference here in LA, in Las Vegas. I didn't even look at those results before just now. This is not where you need armies of psychologists to interpret everything. I literally just opened that up just now without ever seeing it before and was able to garner really powerful insights that would be impossible without data analytics applied across all of you. So let's continue.
Just jumping in real quick, we're also going to use some of that and take a look at talent acquisition versus HR generalists. So we're going to put together a little bit of a report, and we'll we'll make sure that everybody on this call today gets that report when we do get it together.
Yeah, we didn't show you, but you can download all those comparisons in report form, and so Charles is going to send you that. And Charles, can you also do the comparison non-U.S. male versus female and U.S. male versus female? Didn't have time to do it today, but I think they might find some interesting insights there.
Okay.
So again, it all starts with the individual. Many of you took the culture assessment this morning or yesterday before this call and thought, wait, this is just another assessment tool. Well, no, because with a platform like this, those are the key elements, those 28 things across BMW, 8 behaviors, whether you're stability or change oriented, 12 motivators where you're more service or more motivated by service or innovation, and 8 work environments that give you energy or suck energy away from you, whether you like more systematic or creative environments, right? It's important to see the 3 dimensions, because the analogy I use is, let's say if you only use a behavioral tool. So just to throw some out there, the ones that are most commonly used for behaviors only: DISC, predictive index, strength finders, Berkman, Caliper, a lot of the SHL tools or DDI tools are just behaviors. And then some of the newer ones that are really well funded by venture capital, like Plum and Pymetrics. All of those behavior only tools don't allow you to know if someone's going to be successful at work. If you don't know the work styles that give someone energy, which those tools don't measure, you could have 2 people with the same Pymetrics results, exactly like twins, psychometric twins, 2 people with the same DISC results, 2 people with the same predictive index results or strength finder results, and one in the same job sitting next to each other in the same company, one person would be miserable and one person could be really happy, all based on the work environment that drives and gives them energy or not, being creative or systematic in what work environment motivates them. Same could be said with the motivator lens, which the motivator lens is mostly, for example, Hogan or even Lominger, long, extensive 40-page reports. They don't really get into the work style and environment. So you could have 2 people with the same Hogan, or say 2 people with the same Lominger results, and one could be miserable, one could be happy, even doing the same job at the same company. Let's look at it now at the team level, right? We showed you the group of 230 people, and that's good for senior executives to know, for Coca-Cola to know the culture of sales, North America, of finance, of R&D, looking at Coca-Cola Brazil versus Nigeria versus France. However, where does the rubber hit the road every day? The rubber hits the road, and where companies execute the strategy and the vision from executives down to the masses, it's your middle management, it's your team leaders. And today, if you ask the question to all of your team leaders, and I suggest you do this, hey, what's your team culture? Can you articulate it? Your team leaders are going to say, well, what do you mean? I've memorized the corporate culture on the coffee mugs and the t-shirts and on the company wall. And every engagement survey, I get 90% on regurgitating the company culture and the vision. Well, no, what is the culture of your 10 employees that work with you every day? Well, guess what? Surveys and studies show that 94% of team leaders cannot articulate what that culture is of their team. Not the behaviors, not the work styles, not the motivators, not the BMW. And if they cannot articulate that team culture, that begs the question, if you leave with one insight today, one aha, if your team leaders that are basically the future of your company's success on executing and hiring for culture and for a strategy that's aligned to culture, if they don't know it for their team, how are they hiring to keep it if they like it, to clone it if it's good, or how are they hiring to complement it or to change it if they need to change the culture to align with the new strategy? They're not. And this is what leads to all of your companies being underperforming and not as profitable as some of your competitors who are now doing this. So in this example, this is data from my team. We have a very balanced team where half is stability oriented and half is change oriented. The dominant traits are very reflective, okay? But also they can make decisions quickly when they do come to a conclusion, and they're more social, but it's a pretty balanced group. In terms of motivators, we're not so diverse. We have all these people over here in free form and freedom, 10 individuals, whoops. and we have these individuals in knowledge. So part of the challenge for our group is we all do research all the time at my company, and we all have great ideas, but there's nobody who's practical. There's nobody who's practical. So we are a little extreme on the culture, and we need to really execute better. So that's a challenge. And so we are hiring and training people to be more practical. In addition, we have a lot of people who help, who support, so it's a really great environment to be part of, but a lot less leaders and people who are self-reliant. So we often have many meetings on video conference, and then less so people taking charge and running with the projects through execution. So that's an opportunity area for my team. Lastly, on the work styles, we have a very creative environment, which was great a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when we were a pure startup. And now that we're scaling to a systematic environment, you could see that having the majority of people, these 2 green bars, being new solutions, and variety, which means minimal routine and minimal controls and minimal predictability, and everybody doing things differently, that's really difficult. So actually in the last 2 years, I hired mostly people with structure and people who work with facts. Now we need more predictable people and proven methods. And so until we hire them, we now have the insights to be able to develop the rest of this team and align it to the strategy and culture of scaling my software company.
And Juan, just a heads up, we've got about 20 minutes here.
Perfect, thank you. So that is an example of how once you have these insights from measuring, you can now align strategy to culture. And again, the highest performing companies in the world are able to do that best, not just at the corporate level with the t-shirt and coffee mug, value statement, but all the way down throughout the company to align it when they do the yearly objectives, goals, strategy measures, both for geo and matrix organizations, all the way down to each level of the company. Now you can define and pursue a target culture by either A, pairing performance metrics with dominant traits, so call centers, sales employees, where they're not really interacting with other people, and you want to just clone a culture of performance. Okay, you can then measure what that performance culture is, and then train people to be that way and hire for it. Now, on the other extreme, you can say, I want a diverse culture of thought, okay, and then hire and train people to be diverse in the way they attack problems, solutions, and work together. Thirdly, you can also identify a new culture that you need to be based on a new product, technology, strategic roadmap. The best example in the second bullet point is Best Buy. Pre-internet, the best associate profile at Best Buy was a person who was motivated by knowledge. They knew all the things about all the TVs if they were a sales associate, right? They were like an encyclopedia. You'd walk in and they'd know everything. You didn't know anything. There was no internet. Second, they were in their behaviors, very deliberate. They would spend 3 hours with you all the time in the world. You'd feel great. You'd spend 3 hours in Target in Best Buy and leave with the right choice because that person helps you. Now enter the internet. Okay, a macroeconomic, revolution of information post 2002. Do you think Best Buy wanted associates who were knowledge-based and deliberate? No, they wanted associates now who were practical and decisive, who when you walked in with a piece of paper saying, hey, I want this model right here, they could quickly, most efficiently get you that product, get you out of the store in 30 seconds or less, right? So every company has a change in what the culture should be depending on the strategy. And if you say that's not your company, that means your company doesn't change strategy at all, ever. And stagnation leads to corporate death. Culture evolves, culture is living, and you need to manage it day to day, month to month, week by week, year by year. Okay. There's a healthcare study, okay, that we did, a case study where it might seem very obvious, but there were a lot of employees that didn't fit here. And so a healthcare company came to us with a lot of turnover. And when we looked at their high performers, clearly we were able to show them, hey, you're hiring wrong. The high performing nurses in your hospital are dominant, helping and supporting, okay? And they're also, the third one is service. So the top 3 make sense, and you have about 30% of the people in your nursing staff that are getting fired and quitting and not happy because they're much more innovative. You can now use our tool to hire and manage and train those who are not performing to be these other things. You can compare high performers with low performers. Here's a sales example. We're on the left, just like we compared the groups here for US, non-US, male, female. You can slice and dice the data after you've measured it to manage your culture and say, what are our high performing salespeople like? Okay, well, they are motivated by financial security, self-reliance, and influence, where, and these are 3 of the 12 motivators that we measure, where the low performers are motivated by 3 other ones: knowledge, helping, and belonging. And so now you get these insights into the culture of success, the culture of performance at your company, which is different than your competitors, I am sure, for salespeople. So no, not every salesperson who works at one company A is going to work out at company B. The delta, the difference, is the culture. And so leaders can now develop, not only hire for that culture of success in a sales role, you can now, and using these benchmarks, you can now develop your low performers to be more like high performers. So why create this target culture? Well, according to Harvard Business Review, I believe this was in the fall of last year, or in 2018, the second quote, the best leaders we have observed are fully aware of the multiple cultures within which they are embedded, can sense when change is required, and can influence the process. Again, this is all about culture not being static and culture not being monolithic across an organization. The second quote, HBR also emphasized in the Culture Factor series that savvy leaders make use of existing cultural strengths and have a nuanced understanding of how to initiate change with these strengths. SHRM came out with a study already this year that showed that on the left, that regional cultures often differ from the overall culture. So my example about Starbucks in Hialeah, Florida, near Miami, where it's all Latins, being very different than New York versus Boston versus Seattle, is highlighted by this SHRM research. Managers and HR professionals must recognize these differences and address them directly. Now, with tools like Humantelligence and others, and HR technology, data analytics, AI, all applied, you can now not only measure, but leverage them to manage your culture for optimal performance. Your sales team clearly has a different culture than your accounting team. That alone will convince your CEO of what we're talking about today. Now, a lot of questions come up about, well, what do you mean by high performing? How do we measure that among our employees? That's something that we can help you with, but most companies in the Fortune 500 large organizations already know who their high potentials are, who gets bonus every month, every quarter. Now, it's easy for sales, right, to see the KPIs in terms of revenue, but for other employees, frontline employees, for instance, at a manufacturing plant, at McDonald's, at Best Buy, you know, those who stay longer, who don't quit or don't get fired, are your high performers. So tools like ours, you can literally just click a button and say, by demographic or duration of the company, who's been with us longest, who always get bonus, and you can then align and get insights around that population or subgroup and what explains their performance versus others.
All right, I'm going to launch this and we're going to do it fairly quickly. All right, so it'll take it about 5 seconds here to distribute. And we'll give it about 20 seconds. Okay, 15 seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here.
So the KPIs that the majority of you would like to address first, the first one obviously is employee engagement, right? How do we get people engaged? What many of you have found is that after 5 years and 2 billion engagement surveys, this is still a problem, and engagement hasn't gone down 1% in 5 years, despite all the money, billions of dollars spent on engagement surveys, it's not having the impact it's expected to have. That's why companies like ours and companies that truly look at culture that impact your performance are getting a chance now after 5 years of playing with engagement surveys. The second area that you guys would like to address is turnover. Obviously, that's still a problem. Again, engagement surveys haven't impacted that as much, except for on the extreme where you see one leader has 30% or 40% of their employees miserable and about to quit, and you can pick that up in an engagement survey. However, that's a reactive band-aiding, looking at what's wrong in your organization. Okay, it's like treating a common cold. It's too late once you have it. What's the key core issue? Maybe you're not sleeping well. Maybe you're not eating well. Maybe there's a issue at the DNA level of the person getting the cold all the time. So the DNA level culture issue, imagine a tool like ours that can impact turnover and engagement, because you'll be able to now hire people who fit and align with your culture for every team and every role, where everyone finds meaning and purpose and happiness. So that's what we're able to do with a tool like this to address those two top areas, engagement and turnover. In some cases, you can use this information around behaviors, motivators, and work styles, okay, to align to this target culture at the team level. So here's an example where you've already seen the current team culture that I had. You can create a target team culture, and then you can see what the gap is. What is the gap today, and what's the roadmap, and how do I get there? Not just in conceptual consultant, mumbo jumbo, but specifically in a gamified, numbered way. I'm only 22% of 100, and then for each person here, let's say Kelly Brown, Alex Zakarewski, Vlad, you can see the last column, the target, where we need to be and how they fit into that future culture. And then if you click on actions, it'll show you exactly the 28 areas, what 3 or 4 are the gaps, and how you can develop them to help the culture get there by intention. And you roll up and you work with each person as a manager or with HR, and you will achieve your intentional culture. So infusing this information in a daily basis will also help collaboration everywhere. It's hard to see the picture, but imagine an email when you're about to write to somebody in Gmail, Outlook, whatever email platform you have, and you click on their name in the to bar, it'll actually pop up their business personas, how to communicate, how to influence, how to motivate. Hey, don't put too much information in this email. This person doesn't like too much detail. Hey, they're going to push back and challenge you on whatever you send them. Know that before you write them, call them, etc. Or, start off with something social and salutary instead of jumping right into it. Hey, Dan or Michael, did you see the Super Bowl last week, or did you see the Oscars? These are little tips that allow everyone to interact as if they've been married for 5 years. Wouldn't that be great if everybody could already interact well together? Second bullet point, you can help use this data to address how they can be best in their job, perform better compared like the other high performers are, and you can share all this information within a team so the team can work best together, and align to what the culture is expected to be to support the strategy that they're now aligned to for the year or for 3 years. You can also assign tasks based on this. So if you know that somebody's very influencing and leader motivated by that, give them a special project to lead a team. If somebody's really into being very decisive and analytical, maybe give them the 24-hour project to go do research. Where somebody's cautious and deliberate and doesn't make decisions quickly, they'd probably be a little frustrated if you give them a 24-hour project. So all these insights on how to staff teams together, how consulting firms like PwC and Deloitte can put teams together to not only work better together as every 6 months when they're on projects, but imagine interfacing with your clients where you can actually create a team with the same culture to interface best with the culture of your client. Endless possibilities when you can now leverage insights around psychology and culture of people, teams, groups.
And something to keep in mind too, if you've taken that free assessment, you have access to download that plugin there for your email. So if you go to the Google Chrome store or your Outlook store, you can download that.
So also with low performance, up until today, when someone wasn't performing after a year, 6 months, 8 months, you fire them. Well, guess what? Now you know why they're not performing. All those salespeople had great resumes. All those R&D people had great resumes. It's not the hiring that's the challenge. It's on skills, resume, and experience. That's easy. The problem is you don't know if they're a good fit. And so this tool will show you why that fit didn't work out. Instead of firing them, it'll tell you what 1 or 2 behaviors, 1 or 2 motivators, and 1 or 2 work styles they could change. And in the middle of the year, you can already course correct and get them to be higher performing. Next. And you can do that with teams of people as well. A group of Starbucks employees, and people at Quick Trip, a group of people at Compass Group, and any of their stores or groups. Okay, you can also recruit new talent that fits or add to your target culture. So again, not only at the individual, team, or department level, you can either clone what you have as a culture that works or add diversity of thought. We don't tell you what's right. You guys will not have the data. But today, the default is it's basically cloning the leader and what they want. And it's cloning people just like the leader. And 92%, all the research shows, 92% of all leaders are actually just hiring themselves and like forms of themselves psychometrically. That is not your optimal output or outcome. And we can help you get to your optimal output and have a culture of intention and get there in higher performing teams, groups, divisions, and companies. And once you have the team measured, you can then use an ideal profile. Let me quickly show you how that works.
One quick question. Do you want to skip this poll question since we've got the answer on the next one?
Let's skip it. Yeah, just because I want to get to some questions.
Okay, perfect.
Keep going. So to recruit with intention, you can use these ideal profiles and build these for any job vacancy or team vacancy, and you can screen out candidates automatically without doing phone screens and a lot of interviews, and get rid of 90% of the process to go straight to your finalists, at which point then you let the subjectivity of interviews get involved. Next. So here's a simple showing of how you would create that ideal profile. Of the 28 things, you would enable some, not all, and pick on a scale of 0 to 15, whether you want, for instance, helping versus self-reliance, whether you want, a 10 helping, or maybe you go the other direction to a 9 self-reliance. Next. And you do that for behaviors, motivators, and work styles. And then when people apply, and even internal for career mobility, where you can match people to new roles at the company where they would perform. So career mobility is often used by our companies to move people around instead of fire them. You then get these fit scores based on fit with the profile that you're looking for that target culture, fit for the team, fit for compared to any high performers already in the role, and fit for a manager. Red, yellow, green, 0 to 100, gamified, simple for anybody, whether it's a recruiter who's very transactional, to your cerebral HR strategists and analytics people looking at career development and talent development. Next. Again, high quality hires, stronger alignment, less bias, measure teams to get a baseline, manage better with the insights into their habits and motivations, hire candidates that align, and you'll improve your overall ROI, as all of our company clients have done. Next.
Yeah, and we'll get into this slide a little bit more next week. So I'm going to skip this one because we'll get into this a little bit more on part 3. All right, so let's go ahead with some questions. We've got about 5 minutes, but I think if it's okay with you, we probably stay on 2-3 minutes over. Okay. All right, so first question here. How are these behaviors selected in order to be assessed? Can the list be customized, or is it based off a library of behaviors from Humantelligence?
Yeah, so this is a 30-year scientific, proven, technically validated tool that's validated every 3 years. And every time we change any question or answers, even if it's one word, we have to revalidate with, I think, like 3,000 people. And so it's hard to just change them. Now, if you ask any behavioral scientist, industrial psychologist, we did not come up with the 8 behaviors. It's the same things that DISC, predictive index, strength finders, plyometrics all measure. So it's not like we came up with a better 8 behaviors. We just measure those 8 faster than anybody else. We did not come up with the 12 motivations of human beings around the world, or if some people call them values. Again, Hogan, Lominger, we all measure basically the same thing, and scientists around the world would agree. We just do it a lot faster, about 1/5 the time. And then in terms of what work environments exist We did not come up with those. We just came up with the quickest tests to measure them. So we often solve any client that wants to measure what their culture is and how it maps to our 28. We've done that. We've never come up with a client that has something that's not included in the 28. Now that said, we can add questions at the end as part of the survey to give you more insights, and we have an API to build that out so we can show you in quick, easy ways the results in graphical ways that are as slick and easy to understand as ours. So we can do that, but again, the core test we don't really change. Next question.
Perfect. Okay, so the next one here is, what if people are high performers within the current culture, but there are different skills, values needed for the future? I think you may have answered this a little bit earlier, but go ahead and
yeah. So this happens a lot, right? Basing future performance on past performance, we all know sometimes can get you in hot water. So what this does is show you with data, the manager or HR helping the manager, this is the new culture we need. And the past isn't what we needed. So for example, sales people. Sales used to be a pat on the back, golf course, guys industry where they would go and hang out and drink beers, and it was all about being social. No technology needed. Well, then Salesforce came around and technology came around where you needed CRM, software, inputting data, being on a phone, tablets. Well, the culture of high performance, you needed someone now who was, in terms of work environment, loves new solutions, who's more decisive, who doesn't have to only work with people, but also likes analytics and data. Huge change, right? Now with data, you can go to those people and say, hey, Bob, or Jose, or even maybe a Mary who was in that cultural past, and say, this is the new culture that we need, given the macro environment, given the tools, the technology, the strategy of the group in sales. And you're no longer going to be a future success story if we don't help train and develop you. And here's why. And then when you show them data, it takes the ego out of it. They don't get offended. And you can actually now coach and train them for that future culture. Next question.
Okay, so this question goes back to the sales comparison slide, Juan. How do you develop someone from a low performer to a high performer? I would think natural culture they are having is hard to get changed.
Yeah, great question. So in terms of values, that's a little harder. I agree. What motivates people, that's kind of set in stone for chunks of decades at a time. But in terms of behaviors and work styles, that is definitely movable and changeable. So for example, someone whose behaviors are really deliberate. For example, let's say someone's really extreme deliberate, but all the high performers are decisive in a sales role. Imagine if you now can track when that salesperson concludes the sales meeting, all the high performers are sending out the follow-up, the action items, and the to-dos within 24 hours, even within the same day. The low performers were really deliberate. They're actually waiting a week. And clearly, this high performance being tied to being decisive, okay, is hurting the performance of low performers. In addition, let's say in this example, the high performers are really practical. They just get enough information to send to the client because time is of the urgency. The low performers are really knowledge-based in this example. And so they do their research and they get a really comprehensive RFP and they go off and get lots of information, but it takes them a week to respond. Well, now the company can track the KPIs around things such as how fast somebody responds and train them. They don't need 100%, the 80-20 rule. And so against all 28 of these characteristics, whatever the 3 to 5 differences are between high and low performer, there are many things you can put in place to move the needle on behaviors and on work styles so that people actually can be like the other ones who are performing. Next question.
Okay, so the next one here is, can clients use the self-assessment tool as a qualifying tool in the recruitment process to validate cultural alignment? We're going to get into this more next week, but Juan, go ahead and
oh wait, Charles, I have a great case study on the last one, because the last one I answered conceptually. Let me just give. So we had a client, one of the country's largest truck driving companies, 10,000 drivers. They were like, hey, come help us. We have 10,000 drivers. We ran your report across all of them. There are 3,000 drivers who are spending more gas than the other 7,000. How do you explain that? We all, you know, they don't have resumes, so they're just truck drivers, right? They all seem to pass our initial screen. They all have their background checks, and it's costing us $3 million in expenses. Yet they drive the same distance, okay, and you know, they have the same type of engines and trucks. So we did the study and it showed, we pulled out, like we did the U.S., non-U.S. or male, female. We pulled out the population of truck drivers who were spending 3 million more, basically about, I think the number was like 10,000 more a year on gas, or 5,000, and the truck drivers who weren't. And it turns out that the truck drivers spending more on gas, okay, or were extreme decisive. So when they went to red lights and the red light turned from red to green, those truck drivers slammed on they were so aggressive, they were so decisive at an extreme versus deliberate or kind of middle ground people, that they would end up spending more gas. The engine would use more gas per minute, going and accelerating with a huge payload of 10,000 pounds on their trailer, their 18-wheeler. And then when they're passing on the highways, you imagine passing on the highway, how much money more on gas you'll have to spend, and the gas efficiency. So that was a very interesting insight that our tool found. So what they did was, you can't tell a truck driver, hey, be less decisive, Bob. When you go off at a red light, they get a rush off of that. So they put a catalytic converter like you do in golf carts at golf courses, or go-karts, where no matter how hard you press, it doesn't accelerate or use as much gas, and they save $3 million. The other example is in terms of work environment. A lot of the truck drivers were having, I think 2,000 were always late, and they were losing clients, and net promoter scores were going down because they were always late, despite having the same absolute number of stops and the same distance to drive. What they found were that the ones who were always late were super chatty boxes, and their work style, work environment, they loved working with other people. Well, guess what? You don't hire a chatty box to be in a truck all day long by themselves, because when they get to that first location, right, they're just going to chat and they're going to be late. It's going to delay everything. So what they did was they started to time at the client with GPS and all this technology. So they forced people, and they gave bonuses based on a 15-minute drop off, right? And then with that tracking, they showed people where they were, and they got everybody to align, and the net promoter scores went up. So again, many things you can do on behaviors and work styles, the B and the W, harder on the M, to move the needle and improve performance across these psychometric areas. Charles, could you repeat the last question, because in my answer just now I totally erased what you read.
Yep, no worries. Okay, so can clients use the self-assessment tool as a qualifying tool in the recruitment process to validate cultural alignment?
So in hiring, yes, you can use the same test to give to any applicants to see 0 to 100, red, yellow, green, if they align to the culture you're trying to create on the team, if they align to the existing culture, if they align to the manager or not, and what kind of additive culture if you want a diversity of thought. So yes, it can be done on any one of those comparisons. Next.
Okay, perfect. I'm actually going to make that the last question of this webinar. There's quite a few more, and I don't think we're going to have time to get through them. So what we'll do is, if we didn't answer your question, we'll reach out to you directly. There's a handful of you, so we'll reach out directly and answer your questions that you have. But thanks for that one. Okay, so I really appreciate everybody for coming out today. For part 2 on managing culture. In our next webinar, in part 3, we're going to dive into hiring for culture, and that's going to be on March 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Or 11 a.m. Pacific time. I know that a lot of you that signed up for the first webinar didn't see this calendar event on your calendar until yesterday, when the confirmation email came through. It'll likely be the same. If you'd like me to send out a calendar invite to you directly for that session, I can do so. So just let me know. But again, thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.